Hey gang, Dean Hanson here with Farmers Insurance. Wanted to talk about a very common question that we get, which is what do those numbers mean on my auto policy? The 100, 300, 100, or the 30, 60, 25? And it's one of the most basic elemental parts of auto insurance, but often misunderstood. So I wanted to just kind of share some information with the audience here and ask you to please call my office if you have further questions. This PowerPoint here kind of gives us a little bit of a description of kind of what can happen and sort of an example of what really actually does happen. So we're just going to call this Auto Liability 101. And liability, that's the state of being responsible for something, especially by law. So liable means something is your fault. You're responsible for it. That means you're the one that's going to have to pay for fixing the problem. So that's what liability is. It says especially by law. There are lots of laws about insurance liability and laws that govern insurance companies and what they have to do and how they have to do it, and some basic rules. A lot of them actually about who's at fault in certain situations. I'll give you an example. If one car runs into the back of another car, it's almost never the car in front's fault. If you run into something with your car, it's for sure going to be your fault, unless something strange happened, like that person pulled suddenly out into traffic or something like that. But even if someone crams on their brakes and you hit the back of them, you could get ticketed for improper lookout. So that's a very common question. Well, they stopped really fast. Well, you're supposed to give distance between you and the car in front of you, so if that happens, you have a chance to stop. And when you have a chain reaction accident, those happen all different kinds of ways, but typically you pay for the damage to the car in front of you, and the person behind you, behind them, behind them, behind them, etc. Each person pays for the damage to the car in front of them, but not always. Sometimes one person's found to be more at fault than another because of an unsafe situation or unsafe driving or whatever. But that's what liability is. And like I mentioned, if you have questions after this presentation, please call my office and we can explain in more detail. We can also explain specifically to your own situation, your own policy, your own coverages, how it works. The basic concepts I'm going to talk about here are going to be the same across the whole state of Texas. There are some differences from company to company, but I don't think I touch on anything here that is specific to one company or another. But there are two parts of your auto liability policy. There's the bodily injury part. That's the physical damage to a person's body. And there's property damage. That's the damage to property belonging to a third party. So this would be what you would have to pay for if you caused an accident. And today what I want to really talk about is this part, the bodily injury portion. That's the physical damage to a person's body. So let's just have an example. Let's say, for instance, you get up in the morning and get all ready and you start driving out of your neighborhood, you're going to work. And of course, it's not your, wrongdoing that the sun is coming up, and as you come across a four-way stop sign, the sun's in your eyes and you don't see it, and you crash right into a minivan full of people. Let's say there's a mom, there's a dad, and there's a child in there. Well, if you ran a stop sign and crashed into someone, then you would be liable for paying for all that damage. So there's damage to the vehicle, of course, and their vehicle. But we're going to talk about the injuries. So, you might have initial injuries. Sometimes a car accident scenes, you have death. Sometimes you have minor injuries, bumps and bruises. Sometimes you have people that are, unconscious, bleeding, maybe obvious broken bones, things like that. Sometimes people get stuck in a car, pinned inside the vehicle. Cars can catch on fire and burn people, that kind of stuff. But if you're liable for that accident, you have to pay for there's going to be an ambulance that's going to take them to the hospital, or a helicopter ambulance. And I've seen the bills for those. They're very expensive. But if somebody's taken to the hospital in a helicopter ambulance, they're not going to just be there for 15 minutes to get checked out. They're going to go to the emergency room. They're probably going to be in intensive care. They may have to have surgery. There's definitely going to be doctors and hospitals and radiologists and lab work and all that stuff involved that you're going to have to pay for. Now, if you have auto insurance, then this is the basic part of your auto insurance, is this bodily injury liability coverage. So hopefully your insurance policy will be paying for all these bills. But further, sometimes when people are injured, they can't work shortly, for right away. So they might be out of work for a day or a week or a month or a year. And all that also has to be paid for by your auto policy limits. And if it's not, then you get to pay for it out of pocket. You might also have someone sue for pain and suffering. They may be stuck in a hospital bed for 3 months. They may endure lots of pain and surgeries and just anguish and mental suffering, and they need to be paid for that. They need to be compensated for the damage that you did. So as a caring person, of course, you want to have the tools in place so that you can take care of problems that you solve. And insurance for me is for problems that I can't just pull my wallet out and fix. Right, Gus? Good boy. I'm recording this. He's very helpful. And if something costs $100 and you're liable for it, you don't need to file an insurance claim for that. Pay for it. Help the other person out that you wronged, and take care of it. If it's $1,000 and you've got $1,000 you want to spend to help somebody with the problem you caused without filing an insurance claim, you can do that. You have the right to pay out of pocket and not use your insurance if you don't want to. But if it's $50,000, $100,000, $300,000, $500,000, $1 million, and when someone gets hurt really badly in a car accident, it isn't cheap. And the cost of medical care has been going up every year for the last several years at pretty large chunks. If you've been to the doctor lately, you may have noticed. And whenever there's a car accident, insurance companies have to pay those higher rates too. So that's one of the reasons why the cost of auto insurance has gone up. It's because the cost of paying the claims has gotten much more expensive. So this is that example I was talking about with the minivan. And again, you didn't intentionally do anything bad, but because of impeded vision, or maybe you weren't paying attention, maybe your coffee hadn't kicked in yet, I'm not sure, but for whatever the reason was, it doesn't matter. That what matters is you're at fault in that situation. And across the top here, I've put we've got mom, and we've got dad, we've got Billy, and let's say that the driver's side was on the side that you hit, and dad unfortunately was right there and took the brunt of the injuries. The car took a bunch of damage, I'm sure, but I'm going to back up just a second. Let's say, for instance, this happens, and you have having a hard time getting my pointer to work properly. Let's say, for instance, this happens to you, and all of a sudden you look up and you realize there was an accident and that you were in it. And then you see the stop signs and you realize you didn't stop, and you realize that this is your fault. What's the first thing that comes to mind for you? What's the first thing that you think of? It might be, am I okay? Am I hurt? That's a perfectly natural response. Am I okay? And let's say you determine that, maybe you cut your head, but you're okay. And then what is it that comes to mind shortly thereafter? Are they okay? Have is everybody moving? What if you see somebody in the other vehicle? What if the vehicle's rolled over on its side and you can't see in, and you don't really know what's going on? That must be a very scary situation. And then, then your mind will quickly race to, oh my gosh, have I really hurt someone? Oh my gosh, have I killed someone? And then shortly thereafter, the question has to pop in your mind, oh my gosh, how am I going to pay for all this damage I caused? So it's a very scary situation to think of, for sure. But the way that this kind of pans out is, let's say, for instance, that dad has $150,000 worth of injuries. And that can be an assortment of things: life flight, surgery, intensive care, weeks in the hospital, time off work, pain and suffering. Maybe they hire a lawyer. All that stuff has to fit within that $150,000. Well, let's say that it does. It's $150,000 worth of injury. And then we have mom with $45,000 worth of injuries. And fortunately, Billy was in the back seat, properly restrained in his child seat. He was hurt, but it's $10,000 is the total for getting him checked out, and maybe overnight observation. Maybe he had to have some tests done. Maybe he had a minor injury or whatever. But these are very realistic numbers, by the way. In my agency, we have an average of one auto claim a day. So that's the way things go in my world. Every single day, on average, we have an auto claim. And it's actually a little bit more than that now. Last year, it was a little bit more than one a day. And this year, we're pacing ahead of that. So these are very realistic numbers. This is what they look like. So we have a total of $205,000 worth of injuries. Okay. So down here on the left, state minimum, the state requires that you have what we call 30/60. And what that means is the state requires that you have insurance that covers $30,000 per person up to a maximum of $60,000 for bodily injuries in an auto accident. That's what the state requires. As you can see, $30,000 may not go very far when somebody's hurt in a car accident. And I can attest to you that it often is not. So many people driving around right now have minimum liability coverage because they have some insurance and they have an ID card, so they're covered. It's just a very false sense of security, because in reality, they have very little protection between an accident and their personal assets. So I want to go over some of the other limits. That's the state minimum, 30/60. And good limits are 100, 300. $100,000 per person for bodily injuries, and up to a maximum of $300,000 for the entire accident. So after you get to $100,000, the insurance company is done paying for that person, and then you have to start paying for those bills out of your pocket. And they will get their money. So you can say, I don't have anything to take, or you can say, sue me, and they will. They will sue you, and they will get a judgment against you, and they can put a lien against your property, your home. State homestead laws do apply here in Texas. They can't make you liquidate your home to pay a judgment. I've been told by legal professionals, consult your legal professional, but that's the case here in Texas. But if the claim goes over $100,000 for any one person, like Dad here in this instance, the insurance company's done paying. $100,001 is your responsibility, and they'll take cash, they take checks, they'll take credit cards. You might have to go, empty your bank account or whatever you need to do, sell something, but your house is protected by the homestead laws. And I'm not a homestead expert, but I hear that you have, like your house, one car per licensed driver, I think, that owns your home, and then a cow, a chicken, and a pig, or something like that. It's like an old law, but some of your stuff is protected up to a certain amount. But extra stuff like boats, investment homes, like an investment property, that's why the homestead lets you get to file a homestead on the property you live in. If you own investment properties, you may have seen you can't file homestead on properties you don't live in because they are not protected the same way. So you could have very large assets that are exposed. So good limits is 100, 300. Again, that's 100,000 per person up to a total of 300,000 for the whole accident. So you could have 6 people with $50,000 worth of injuries. See what I'm saying? So we hit that 300,000 limit and it's done. Or 3 people with 100,000 would max out both sides of that limit. This is the minimum limit that we will write in our agency. I'm considering going higher because it just gives people a false sense of security that $100,000 is going to be enough to fix people. And it just is not in so many cases. There's a solution to that problem, which I'll talk about here in just a minute. Then you have 250, 500. That's $250,000 per person for bodily injuries, and then a total of 500,000. There are other limits in between these and also higher limits, but I just wanted to talk about these 3. This is called a split limit. The 30 per person, 60,000 for the whole accident. There are also some limits that are just a single limit. It's just one big bucket of money, and that's it. And those typically include the bodily injury and the property damage, kind of all lumped into one big bucket. But this is the way it's done in Texas for personal lines auto policies, by and large. So this 250, 500 is better limits. Of course, you can go to 500, 500. You can go even higher than that. So let's look at Dad here. If you had state minimum liability limits of 30, 60, $30,000 worth of Dad's injuries would be covered. $30,000 worth of Mom's would be covered because she had 45,000 and the maximum is 30. So only 30,000 would be covered. Now, Billy, 0 is covered. Why would 0 be covered? Mom and Dad took up the whole 60,000 and there's no longer any coverage left for Billy's $10,000 injury. So no more coverage. So we had 60,000 total $1,000 that were covered. And so your out of pocket would be $145,000. The total injuries of 205,000 minus the 60,000 that your auto policy covered, you'd be out of pocket $145,000. I do not want to be the agent responsible for having this kind of coverage in force. I don't want to get subpoenaed to go explain it to a judge. I don't like to explain this kind of thing to my customer. When my clients have problems, I want to show up with the solution to their problem. And in this case, I would just basically be telling them they have more problems. So I just don't like it. On the 100, 300 limits, so on Dad, $100,000 would be covered. On Mom, her entire 45,000 would be covered because it's under the 100,000 and we still have not exceeded the 300,000 total. Billy's $10,000 worth of injuries would be covered for a total of 155,000. Unfortunately, there's $50,000 that's not covered because it went over the per person limit of 100,000. And so if this were your accident you were responsible for, you would be out of pocket $50,000. So here's what that would mean. You would get sued and you'd have to go to court. And if you had the money, you'd write a check for $50,000 and give it to the plaintiff and you're done. You would probably not have $50,000 laying around. Some people do, some people don't. So let's say you don't. So then they will create what's called a judgment against you. So you'll have a judgment against you for $50,000 that goes on your credit, that you have an outstanding $50,000 judgment that was placed against you. And you could possibly set up a payment plan. You could probably offer to have it payroll deducted. It's pretty limited situations where they can garnish your wages, but I believe that is a possibility. I don't want to scare anybody with that, but I think that is possible in certain circumstances. I'm not an attorney. I just know that I don't want to leave my client with a $50,000 bill to pay. Again, I said that this is the minimum limits that we will write in our agency. Because there's also there's 30, 60, there's 50, 100. And a lot of times people are tempted to go with that lower amount because it's cheaper insurance that way. It doesn't cost as much money. But we're talking about a couple bucks a day, you can fix this problem. It's not expensive. If somebody has never offered you 250, 500, please go back to your insurance professional and ask them, what would it cost me to upgrade my insurance? Or if you'd like, call my office, or you can find us at iknowdean.com, and we can help you discover what the best value is for your insurance and for your limits. Further, we have the 250, 500 limits down here under better limits. Dad's $150,000 injury total would be covered. Mom's $45,000 injury total would be covered, because both of those are below the $250,000 per person limit, and combined they are less than the $500,000 combined limit. And then we have Billy with the $10,000 injuries, which are covered, for a total of $205,000 that are covered. So that nets an out-of-pocket of $0. So imagine if you get in a car accident and you realize you're not hurt, and you look up and realize other people are hurt, but you know that you have coverage like this. You're like, these people are hurt, but I've got the insurance behind me that's going to take care of them. I'm going to be able to take care of these people I injured. I'm going to be able to take care of this family that I just busted up a little bit, you know? How do you feel now compared to the way you felt when you weren't sure what you had? You must feel better about that. Being able to take care of the situations we cause in life is one of those things that this kind of coverage right here will make sure that if there's an accident that's your fault, it's just a really bad day. It's not a bad life. The state minimum, there's no way anybody's going to recover from a $145,000 judgment. I mean, how do you ever pay for that with paying for everything else? How do you ever make that right? Normal people just don't have the ability to do that. Now, wealthy people can. Some people can just write a check and pay for it. That's great. But out of my clients that I had to say, if I ranked my clients from the wealthiest to the least wealthiest, guess who it is that has the best insurance? And it's not just because they can afford it. It's because they know how to protect their assets. I have clients that have multi-million-dollar homes that are free and clear, paid for. $100,000, $200,000 cars that are free and clear titles, paid for. Do you think they have really good insurance on that stuff? Absolutely. They certainly do. That doesn't mean that, a not very nice car that has a big loan on it doesn't mean that car can't do the same damage as we just talked about right here. So it's important for everyone. You may not have a large personal wealth right now, but you may in the very near future. You may in the far future, but you don't want to be saddled by a $145,000 judgment, continually taking that away so that you never get to build the personal wealth that you want for you and your family and into retirement. So you can find us at iknowdean.com. Our phone number is 972-727-9705. Please give us a call. Our professional insurance agents are all waiting to answer your question and to help you with your insurance. Thanks for listening today. I sure do appreciate it. I'm very passionate about what I do. This is a very, very simple insurance lesson, but it may have brought up questions, and that's okay. Please call us and let us help. If you have questions about any other insurance scenarios that you think might be a good idea for a video, please let me know, and I'll put together a tutorial for them as well. Thanks for listening. Again, this is Dean Hansen with the Hansen Agency in Allen, Texas. Stay smart.